Good afternoon and welcome to Cure Talks. I'm Priya Menon, your host, and today we are discussing how leukemia was beaten with groundbreaking CAR T cell therapy. And our guest today is none other than Dr. Stephan A. Grupp, CAR T cell expert and Director of Cancer Immunotherapy and Cell Therapy Transplant Section at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and University of Pennsylvania. We also have Tom Whitehead, father of Emily Whitehead, the first pediatric patient who was administered CAR T cell therapy with us on Cure Talks. On the panel are Gary Peterson and Jack Aiello, cancer advocates and myeloma survivors. So a very warm welcome to all. We will be addressing questions from the audience towards the end of the discussion. You can send in your questions to priya@trialex.com, or you can also post your questions in the comment section. So beginning with the discussion, Dr. Grupp, it's such a pleasure to have you here on Cure Talks, and you have saved Emily and the children who are enrolled in the CAR T trial. And I believe Emily is almost 6 years in remission. Dr. Grupp, do you think we are at the edge of a breakthrough in cancer treatment and probable cure?
Well, thanks for having me on, and that's of course a really important question. Are we looking at a cure here? And I think that you have to break that question down and think of it in pieces. And so everybody's heard a lot about immunotherapy as a new way to treat cancer, and immunotherapy is actually a whole lot of different things. This particular kind of immunotherapy, called CAR T cell therapy, has been used in patients with blood cancer, and specifically with the most experience in the most common kind of cancer that kids get, which is called acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is a kind of blood cancer. And so for that group of patients, we have seen some amazing results, even in patients who have no other treatment options and no real hope for any kind of disease control, not to mention a cure. And with patients who are a number of years after that therapy remaining in remission, we are starting to hope that maybe that's a cure for some of those patients. But the broad question is whether this is a cure or not. I think that there are a lot of different kinds of cancer. That most cancers are not blood cancers, and this really changes the whole face of cancer care if we start to see these kind of dramatic results in patients who have other kinds of cancers, like pardon me, for example, lung cancer or breast cancer or pancreas cancer. And so that we haven't seen yet. So is it a cure? It may very well be for patients with a very specific kind of cancer. Is it something that's going to change the whole field of cancer therapy? That's the work of the next 5 years.
Absolutely. This certainly has given terminal patients a last chance, and I believe you have made many, many parents very, very thankful, Dr. Grupp. Tom, great to have you with us. I know you're driving down from New York City after attending the Time Gala, so thanks for joining us. And I want to congratulate you. Emily will be almost 6 years cancer-free on 10th May this year. So how do you feel?
Well, we feel very blessed, to have Emily back to normal again. When you see her with her friends now, if you didn't know what happened to her, you can't tell. She looks normal. And to parents, that's what a cure looks like. So to have her now 6 years past the treatment and back to normal, the only medicine that she's on right now is the Hizentra, the immunoglobulin replacement, which we do every 2 weeks. So it's really just twice a month that she has to get medicine. And other than that, she's healthy and happy, and we couldn't be happier as far as our family goes. It was a miracle.
I totally identify. Oh, yes. I totally identify with that. I myself have 2 children, and I can understand how you're feeling. It must be really uplifting. So, Tom, you and Curry, your wife, started a foundation, the Emily Whitehead Foundation for Childhood Cancer. And I believe you recently donated $50,000 to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So I would like you to talk a little bit about your foundation and its activities for our audience.
Yeah, thank you. So In January of 2015, we decided to start the Emily Whitehead Foundation. We did notice a lot of people were using Emily's story to raise money, and a lot of that money wasn't going back to pediatrics. So our goal is to keep the attention on pediatrics and the focus on pediatrics and help fund it because it's so underfunded. And we've been very fortunate to have some really amazing volunteers help us. And, you know, to have given now Dr. Grupp $350,000 total. And we're also part of another grant of $250,000 that's going there to Dr. Barrett. It's pretty amazing for us. And again, we want to specifically focus on the pediatric immunotherapy and make sure they have the funding to move it forward so other families can have the same outcome that we did.
That's great. We hope your foundation is able to help a lot of children out there, Tom. Dr. Grupp.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Dr. Grupp, a lot of debate and discussion surrounding CAR-T therapy has been around mostly two aspects, one being the severe side effects and the other being the high cost of treatment. So we'd like to talk about this one by one. Can you talk a little bit about the severe cytokine release syndrome and how, for Emily, you found a rheumatoid arthritis drug as a remedy?
Sure. So I think it's important to understand both that therapy can be helpful and it can also have side effects, and I think it's important to understand that. I'm going to step away from that question for just 1 second and just follow up on Tom's point because I think it's so incredibly important. You know, we here at CHOP are incredibly grateful for the funding support that we've gotten from the Emily Whitehead Foundation, but I think Tom and I both strongly believe that even more important than the funding is the messaging. And the messaging is that the first CAR T-cell therapy in medical history was approved for children and young adults. And kids led the way, pediatrics led the way. It's very unusual, actually, to have a new therapy approved in kids. And especially as the first thing. And so we want to make sure that as the immunotherapy revolution continues, that, of course, the appropriate attention is paid to all of the very serious adult cancers that we hope that we can help, but we want to make sure that there's some attention paid to the pediatric side as well. So I wanted to jump in on that because I so strongly agree with Tom in that regard, and he and his the foundation and his family have really been leaders for this point of view. Now let me go back to the question you asked me, which was about side effects. So this therapy is basically a setup where we collect immune cells called T cells from each individual patient. We then genetically reprogram these cells so that they become cancer fighter cells, and then we put the cells back in the patient. And in situations where the patient has a relatively small amount of leukemia, the side effects that we see are very mild. A patient may or may not have a fever. They may not spend a short period of time in the hospital. They may stay out of the hospital altogether. They may have a short headache one afternoon, really almost nothing. But what we've also learned, and we learned this from Emily's case and from cases since her, is that patients who have a great deal of leukemia in their body can have a completely different experience. And so the great news for those patients is that we're also able to put them into remission with CAR T-cell therapy. But if you have a patient who has literally pounds of leukemia in their body, the T cells, the engineered, the reprogrammed T cells, have to grow to a very high level to attack all that cancer. And that's why this works. So if you have a little bit of cancer, your T cells don't have to do very much. But you have a lot of cancer, then the T cells really have to get revved up to get on top of all that cancer. And it's nearly miraculous to us that we're actually able to see those kind of responses even in patients with completely uncontrolled disease. Why do patients get sick? Why do they get this thing called cytokine release syndrome? Well, it happens because those T cells are part of your immune system, and your immune system gets incredibly revved up in the process of killing all that cancer. And so we really did have to learn how to control that reaction. And the first patient where we really recognized this reaction that at the time we didn't even have a name for it, but now we call it Cytokine Release Syndrome. And when we really understood how severe this could be was in Emily Whitehead's case, because she fit that profile. She had very significant amounts of leukemia, and the T cells had to really get very revved up in order to control all of her disease. The reason that it is safe to do this, and the reason that Emily, after definitely a tough time in the intensive care unit at Children's Hospital Philadelphia, the reason that she was able to pull through was what you mentioned. So we were doing all sorts of science in the background trying to figure out why Emily was as sick as she was. We were doing research tests to look at, without getting too technical about this, we were looking at all the things that happen when your immune system gets activated, including producing all these inflammatory proteins, which is how the immune system talks to each other. One particular protein was through the roof. It was incredibly high. Turns out, oddly enough, it's not even a protein that's made by T cells. It's made by other cells of your immune system. And that protein turned out to be the one that was making Emily sick. And the great news is that there just happened to be a drug that was developed for patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And Dr. Carl June, who's very involved in developing this therapy, his daughter actually has rheumatoid arthritis. And that drug, it's called tocilizumab, would never have heard of it as a cancer doctor before this. That drug specifically targets the abnormally high level of this inflammatory protein that was making Emily sick. And that observation and her experience getting better very rapidly after we treated this toxic side effect with this new medication that had never been used for this purpose ever has, I think, not only been transformative for this particular CAR T-cell therapy, but it's now the basis of all the toxicity management in CAR T-cell trials across the world.
And I understand this drug has since been approved by the FDA for treating CAR T-cell therapy-induced CRS?
Yes, and that's also a fascinating side story because this is the company that makes the drug is not the company that makes the CAR T cells. So Novartis makes the CAR T cells, and they don't make tocilizumab. But the Food and Drug Administration recognized that they were going to say, hey, you need to use this drug for this purpose. So they basically used data from the cell therapy trial to provide an extra approval, and that, I think, is a highly innovative way to go about this. They didn't make the drug company do their own trials to show that it worked. We already had data that it worked. It was very clear data with dramatic responses like we saw in Emily's case, and they were happy to use that data. I think it was a great thing that the FDA did.
Yes, absolutely. So, Tom, as Dr. Grupp was explaining that Emily had a severe episode of the CRS, Cytokine Release Syndrome, and I believe she was critically ill at one point. She was put on a ventilator, and a coma was induced to keep her alive. How did you and Kerry hold up during this time? Must have been so very difficult. It'd be great if you could share that. What kept you going on?
Yeah, so, we knew before entering the trial that Emily could not survive without it. So keeping the faith that that was our only chance and it had to work, I never looked at it as any other way than the end result would be that she would survive. But I can tell you that 14 days that she was on the ventilator were brutal. So, we just kept talking in her ear, playing music to her. But at some points it didn't even look like Emily anymore, but she just kept fighting. And when we would feel weak, she would give us a sign, and when we could, we relied on faith a lot, and we just stayed positive and said there's no other outcome that's going to happen here, and she's going to wake up from this and be okay. And, after the 14-day coma, she came back to us on her 7th birthday, but absolutely what Dr. Grupp said when he came through the door, it was looking very bleak to the point where the PICU team didn't think she could survive, and he suggested the tocilizumab, and once he gave it to her, everything turned around. Within 12 hours, things were turning around, and they were telling us in the intensive care unit that they had never seen a child that sick get better any faster. So, we had been waiting for what I say was our miracle, and then it finally came with that dose of medicine, and Emily turned around, and, she woke up on her 7th birthday on May 2nd of 2012, and we went home on June 1st, and she's been cancer-free ever since.
It's so amazing to hear that.